right, good morning, guys. Today I'm going to show you how to make a postcard quilt, and this will be a beginning sewing activity for us to teach us how to get started on our next project. Okay, so the first thing is I'm going to take a piece of scrap paper and I'm going to start my pattern first. So my pattern's dimensions are 6 inches by 8 inches long. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure out 8 inches long on here. And I'm going to take this out about 6 inches. Make sure it's nice and even. Okay, so this is going to be the dimension of my pattern. Okay, but I'm going to break this up into 3 sections. So the sections are going to be 2 by 8 inches wide. So again, I'm going to line my ruler up with the edge here, measure out the 2 inches. 2 inches there. Go ahead and draw my longest line first. Okay, and then I'm going to divide this space up into 2 more, and that space is going to be, what is this going to be? It's going to be 3 inches by 4. So here's the 3 inch. Here's the 3 inch. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So I'm going to show you today how to make a postcard quilt. And this is going to be a beginning sewing activity for us to learn how to use the machines and how to get us started on our next project. So the first thing I've done is I've created a pattern here on a piece of scratch paper. I've measured out a rectangle that was 6 inches wide by 8 inches long. And what I've also done is then I've divided this into 3 different sections. The first one being 2 by 8 inches. The next one being 3 by 4 inches, and the last one 4 by 5 inches, and then I've cut it out. Okay, so the next step is to go and find some pieces of fabric that you feel like they kind of go together. They belong together, they look pretty good. You could say that they feel like they're in harmony. Okay, if you find fabric that has adhesive on the back like this, you cannot use the adhesive. Okay, if you can peel it off, that's great, but if it stays on like this, you don't want to use it. It's going to jam your sewing machine. Okay, so I actually let's see if this is, I really like this one, and then I think I'm also going to use let's see, so maybe I'll use this one here for my 3 by 4. And then maybe this one here for my 4 by 5. And then let's see, maybe this one here. Oh, this one's not going to work because it's not long enough. So I'm going to use this one here for my 2 by 8. Okay, so once I pick out my fabric, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this on here and cut it out. Now when you get your fabric, you want to make sure you utilize the fabric to the best of your ability. So for this particular piece of fabric here, I'm going to actually stick this one here up in the corner. I don't want to do this right in the middle because I'm going to waste a lot of material. I could actually use that for something else. I'm going to stick this one up in the corner, make sure my edges are even, and then I'm going to take a pencil. You can also do this with a marker, and I'm just going to trace this on here. This is a quick way to do it. The other way you can do this is actually pin it on your fabric and cut it out. Okay, so I can actually see that I have a line here. I'm going to go ahead and trace out all my different fabrics, and then I'm going to cut them out. Okay, so this is pretty much what I've ended up with. I went and I cut my fabric all to size. These are exactly the same size as my pattern. So at this point I want to kind of flip these over and see specifically what side do I want to use. Because this is just practice, it doesn't matter what side you use. Actually, I think I'm going to stick to this, what I have here. So the next step here is we're going to actually begin sewing these pieces together, and there is a method to this. You want to start with the smaller pieces, sewing the smaller pieces that even up together first, and then add the piece that evens up with the rest of it at the end. I can't sew this to this first and then sneak this in later. It doesn't really work that way. So you kind of have to start with the smaller pieces. So I'm going to start with my two smaller pieces, the 3x4 and 4x5, and I'm going to put the 4-inch sides together like this. And now I'm going to bring them face to face. I'm going to make it like a sandwich. So basically the right sides are facing one another. Okay, I'm going to pinch them together, make sure they're nice and together. Now I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to pin this together. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through both, right? And then I'm going to come back up on the other side. Okay, so pinning is really important. Pinning it just through one side like this is not proper pinning, you guys. You have to actually come back up onto the other side, and then I'm going to do the same over here on this side. So 2 pins, make sure it's nice and even. Actually, I'm going to move mine over because it's a little bit to the side. I want to make sure they're nice and even for this. And you also want to pin vertically and leave the head sticking out a little bit. So that is a proper pin, okay? And you want to do it probably twice. All right, I'm ready to sew. Okay, so I'm ready to sew and I have my fabric pinned together. Remember that the right sides are facing one another, okay? Super important. So I'm going to go ahead and put this pin side facing up in the sewing machine, and I'm going to put my seam towards the end. I'm going to drop that presser foot down. That is super important. Don't forget to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tie my knot first. So I'm going to scooch this over a little bit so I'm following our 3/8 of an inch line. So I'm going to forward a few, and then I'm going to reverse a few. There's my knot. Now I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to take my pins out as I go. You do not want to sew over a pin because you can break your needle on your sewing machine. Now when I get to the end here, I'm going to reverse it a few, and then I'm going to let go and go forward all the way off the machine or off the fabric, and then I lift up my presser foot and I should be able to pull this out gently. If not, I wiggle the needle up and down. I'm going to cut both sides of that thread on both sides now so it's nice and clean for me. There we go. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come right back here and I'm going to put my fabric so it lines up right in the center of my presser foot. Okay, this is called a zigzag foot right here, the way it looks. So I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down like this so it's right in the middle. Okay, now I'm going to turn my setting on my machine to a zigzag setting, probably H right here. Okay, it depends on what your machine looks like. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I'm going to go ahead and turn mine to H. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to seal up these raw edges right here so they don't fray like that. You see how that happens? So I'm going to go ahead and the same idea. I'm just going to go forward a few times and I'm going to back it up a few to tie my knot. I'm going to go all the way down to the end, keeping that fabric right in the middle so it's going on and off the fabric, on and off. I'm at the end, I back it up, I go forward to the end. If my needle is still stuck in the fabric, I have to lift this out, lift up my presser foot, and give it a trim. There we go. Okay, so that part is done. Okay, my next step here is to open up my fabric swatch that I just stitched, and I didn't do a very good job because it's kind of off the side, but that's okay. I'm going to iron this flat, so I'm going to put the face of it again down. Remember, this is the side that I want to show. This is my back side. I'm actually going to lay this flat. I'm going to take my iron and iron this so it's nice and flat. Okay, so something like that. So basically, the black side is laying over the yellow side. Okay, so I just ironed my fabric nice and flat. So basically this is the back side, and if I turn it this way, this is nice and clean. This is my seam here. This is what we call a seam, nice and clean. I didn't do the best job of getting that on the side, but that's okay. So the next step here is I'm going to do what we call a top stitch, okay? And you see how the black is actually folded over the yellow. I'm going to stitch the black to the yellow fabric on top again one more time. It's called a top stitch, and what that does is it acts to reinforce that seam. So I'm going to bring my machine over here. Let me get this in here. So the idea is that I want to try to sew this as close to the seam as possible without going over. So I actually have a control on my sewing machine that will allow me to move my needle from left to right. So if I turn this here to E, see how my needle just moved? Look at that. This needle just moved from the middle to the left. Some machines actually allow you to do it both ways. I'll just leave mine in the center because I'm thinking most of yours don't have that option. So again, I'm going to put that presser foot down, and I'm probably going to follow this line right here all the way down in a straight stitch. Okay, so again, I'm going to start by going forward a few times, reversing a few times to the end, keeping it nice and slow, following that seam line, trying not to go over. When I get to the end, don't forget to tie that knot, reverse and forward a few. Okay, lift up that needle if you have to. Cut your thread way far out so it doesn't get sucked back up in the machine. And then this is actually what you should have. You see I have sewn the fabric to the yellow, and it just makes for a really, really nice finishing. Okay, so that part is done. So the next step here is to take my piece of 2x8 fabric and decide what side I want facing up. Actually, I like this side. So again, this is the top of my fabric. This is the top of my fabric. I sandwich them together face to face. Okay, and I want to line up the edge of this as best I can. You see how this part is popping out a little bit here? I'm just going to ignore it. I could always cut that with some scissors to keep it nice and straight. Okay, so don't forget you have to pin. So in through the top. And do that on both sides. And I'm going to begin that process again. Okay, so machine back over here. I'm going to do a straight stitch first, make a seam. Reverse it for your knot. Keep it in a straight line. Make sure you take out those pins before you run over them. Okay, when I get to the end here, I'm going to back it up and tie my knot. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I went and I made that first seam on my 2x8. So you see how I kind of have this part popping up right here? I'm going to need to trim that so it's nice and even here. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim the yellow first as best I can, and then just go ahead and give this a nice whack it off. Okay, so there we go, nice and even this time. Okay, so now I'm going to do my zigzag stitch in my sewing machine. So bring the machine over here. Make sure my presser foot is half on and half off. I'm going to zoom up on that so you guys can see. Okay, see how it's actually half on and half off? It's not like this. Okay, you have to go on and off of the fabric. So forward a few, oops, don't forget to turn it to zigzag, there we go. Forward a few, backwards a few, and then all the way down to the end. If you have any of this kind of stuff here, maybe get that out of your way. to the end, don't forget to tie a knot. Okay, so there we go. Basically that edge is encapsulated in that zigzag stitch, and it shouldn't fray on you. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to iron it flat and then come back and do a top stitch. Okay, so I'm at the iron, so here we go. I'm going to open this up flat and I'm going to iron this flat. So the yellow is going to come over my 2x8 piece fabric. Just as a reminder, you guys, you never want to leave the iron down and walk away, right? And honestly, when you're done ironing, unless there's someone standing behind you, you need to make sure you turn it off and unplug it. Okay, so I just ironed my fabric down. So if I look at it from the back, this piece is actually overlaying this 2x8, which means that my top stitch is going to go on top of this fabric again, really, really close, right next to that seam, as close as possible. So I have to make sure that my setting is back on a straight stitch. Pop this inside that machine as close to this edge as I can. Zoom in on this a little bit. There we go. So forward a few, backwards a few. You should also listen to your machine. It's telling you if it's running smoothly. If it starts making some funky noises, you know that something's wrong. Probably need to rethread or check your setting. Don't forget, when you get to the end, I'm going to reverse. I'm not going to reverse here. I'm actually going to reverse here because my fabric actually ends here. Lift that needle up and out. And then basically I have this really nice piece of flat fabric that is really durable and has been stitched with the zigzag on both sides, so it's not going to fray on the outside, on the back side, and it's pretty much stitched 3 times on each seam. All right. Okay guys, so I wanted to show you one more thing really, really quick. So one more time, we're coming to the sewing machine. Be nice to the sewing machine, talk nicely to it. That way you can make friends, make nice. Don't forget to turn the machine on by pushing the button on the right hand side. Make sure the light is on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to do some detail stitching within here really quick, and I'm going to show you how to turn this without worrying about taking it out. Okay, so remember, you have your 2 threads here. They're being pulled out nice and even. I'm going to go ahead and zoom up a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to do like a follow a zigzag here. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to follow this. So I'm going to go ahead and put my fabric underneath the needle. Okay, I'm going to drop that lever, that foot down to pinch my fabric. Okay, now remember, forward, backwards, forward. So I'm going to start by going forwards view. Good. Now let's back it up so you guys can see. Look at when I reverse. When I reverse, I'm going to push that button and hold it down. Reverse. Okay, now when I get to the end, I let go. And now I'm going to go forward a few. Okay, that's it. That's how easy it is to reverse. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. Okay. Oops. Are you going to focus there? Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to go to this corner and then I'm going to stop. So I'm just going to go straight. Oops, 5 miles an hour. Now look, my needle is up here. I'm going to manually put it into the fabric. I'm going to lift up my foot and I'm just going to turn this going the opposite direction, put my foot back down and keep going. I'm going to come all the way down to here. When I get to this corner, I'm going to stop, leave the needle inside, lift up my foot, twist it back this way, put my presser foot back down and go. Don't forget to put that presser foot down. You will jam your machine and you'll have to rethread. Now, this is easy for me because I have a pattern to follow, but you guys can make up your own pattern. It's easiest to do straight lines. Curvy lines are not so easy, but I would suggest trying to do something like this. Just makes it more fun. Okay, let's say I just want to end here. All right, what I'm going to do, sorry guys. Okay, I have to make sure that my needle is up and out of the fabric, which it is. I also have to lift up that presser foot, lift it. Now I'm going to gently pull this, just pull it out. If it's not pulling or getting stuck, you have to wiggle the needle up and down and pull. And then also don't forget to cut that thread really far over here. There you go. Okay, you want this to be nice and long for the next person. I always give it a good tug. It's better to just have excess in this case than not enough. All right, so hopefully that clarifies some things for you, and don't be afraid to get on the machines. Have fun. Hey guys, all right, so one of the next things we're going to do to our quilted postcards is we're actually going to hand applique a fabric swatch onto the top somewhere, your choice, somewhere on the top of this fabric so that you would know how to stitch a free-floating piece of fabric onto the face. So I have a bunch of these different fabric swatches that I've picked up, and I'm not too concerned about this because this is just practice. I'm going to use this gold one and I'm going to pin it into place just so it doesn't skip around on me. Okay, through both of the fabrics and pop it back up so it goes through both. Okay, I'm also using a lot thicker thread for this, just so you guys can see. You'll use your regular thread. Okay, now before we talked about this, and I had told you not to tie any knots in the end of your thread, but for this I'm going to tie a good double, triple knot in the end here so that it doesn't go through my fabric. Remember how I do that is I make a loop and go through 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Can't see. There you go. Oops, that didn't really work. Okay, something like that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here to applique this is I'm actually going to start in a corner. Let me move this a little bit. And I'm actually going to start underneath the fabric for this in the corner here. I'm going to give this a good pull all the way to the end of my thread. And basically my knot is going to hide underneath my fabric. See that? I actually have to. I'm going to cut this. And get that out of there. Get that out of my way. So the knot is hidden under there. And now I'm just going to go ahead and do a running stitch, or not a running stitch. I could do either. I could do a running stitch or a whip stitch. A running stitch would be like this through the front. Give it a good pull. Come back up through the back. Keep it in a straight line. Give it a good pull. So this would be the running stitch. We did this also to make our seam to connect 2 pieces of fabric together. Okay, the other way I can attach this would be the whip stitch, which we did with our journal collaging. So however you would decide, either coming from the top or the bottom, and then just going through the front in a kind of rolling motion. Okay, come back up underneath through the swatch, and then back through the face of the fabric. There's lots of different ways to do this. I guess it just depends on the look that you're going for. You don't want to pull too tight. You don't want to buckle the fabric. You definitely don't want the fabric to squish, right? You want it to be nice and loose, and you want it to lay flat. Okay, so I would do that all the way around the outside edge of my quilted postcard. Let me go ahead and show you how to tie this off. So I'm basically at the back here. This would be the simple way to do it. I would just do a triple knot back here. Go through 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Give that a good pull nice and close to the fabric. Maybe do it again. I won't need to do it again with this fabric because it's so thick, but when you use your thin sewing thread, you definitely want to do a good double knot. And then when I sew this down onto my postcard, which we're going to do, remember, if this is my postcard here, I'm actually going to stitch this in the machine eventually, and I will cut this to size. So I will cut all this excess, and even this unevenness will be what we call square it off, and then we'll sew that in the sewing machine, and we'll be done with our postcard project. All right. This would also be a good time if you wanted to add any beadings or any tassel or anything like that. Or even play around more with the sewing machine. This right here is a zigzag stitch that I've just followed on some of the patterns. These are just some of the more decorative stitching. You can do that too. Alright, get used to those sewing machines, guys, because we're going to be using them. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, one more video. So we have finished piecing together our postcard and done all the detailing that you're going to want to do to this, because once we sew it onto our postcard, you're not going to be able to do much after that. So what I'm going to do is I have taken my postcard here and I have figured out where I want to place it, which is right about here on my fabric swatch. Okay, and I have pinned it also, here we go, twice to make sure it doesn't slip around. And I'm also pinned it close to the center of the postcard, so when I sew on the sewing machine, it's going to stay out of the way of those pins. Okay, now what's different about yours is that you actually have real postcards, so you will sew the front of the postcard onto the front of your fabric, and you'll see the actual postage area, the part to write on, will be this right here facing us. Okay, so don't forget that part. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and put this into my sewing machine with the card facing upwards. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit if I can. There we go. Put that presser foot down. Don't forget, that's the most important part. I'm just going to do a straight running stitch. You don't need to back up for this necessarily because the poster board is going to hold that stitch pretty well, but it's always a good idea to do a reverse, so we'll reverse it. Now look at, I'm going to follow the line with the edge of this foot. You see that? And I got to keep it nice and even here, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward, keeping it straight and going slow. When I get to the corner, I'm going to put the needle into the card. I'm going to lift my presser foot up, twist the card towards me, put my foot back down, and carry on. So I'm just going to keep on coming down. I would do that all the way around, so I'm going to back up here. Lift up my presser foot, slide this out to the left. If it gets stuck, I'm going to wiggle the needle up and down as I pull off to the left. Make sure I cut all of my strings nice and flush here. There we go. Okay, so I have something like this. Oops, get that off of there. Okay, so now before I'm done, the last thing I have to do here is I need to trim off the excess fabric around the outside of my postcard. I can remove my pins now because it's sewn onto the card. I'm going to take my scissors, a good pair of large ones, and I'm just going to go ahead and follow the edge of the postcard here and cut it nice and straight. Just going to cut right through my stitching there. I have something like that. Look at that, nice and clean. All those uneven edges doesn't even matter anymore. Okay, so I'm gonna do one more thing on the sewing machine. I am going to swap my dial here to a zigzag stitch, and I'm just gonna pull that over to here. I think I'm gonna leave my setting at a 3. And also, if you can see up here, my stitch length is at a 3 as well. We're gonna try that and see how that goes. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop this into my machine, and I'm going to line up the presser foot so that half of my fabric is on and half of my fabric is off. Do you see that? That's actually going right down the center there. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and forward and backwards. Forward, backwards. I'm gonna go ahead and zigzag all the way down to the bottom here. I don't need to worry about pinning because it's already attached to the fabric. This is just a finishing. When I get to the end, make sure my needle is in the fabric, twist and turn it. Make sure the needle's in. Oops, I ripped the thread. Oh, I'm out of thread. Okay, darn it. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that. That's just a nice edging there to keep it from fraying. It's a nice finishing touch. And I would do that around the whole edge here, so it would look like that on the other side. A zigzag stitch. Sorry guys, I ran out of thread. But that's what you're gonna do to complete the project, and then that's it, we're done. And hopefully you feel really comfortable using that sewing machine after this. And you guys can add more if you like, that's up to you, but we're gonna start our project probably tomorrow or on Wednesday. Okay. All right, or on Thursday, I guess. All right.